Welcome into the 8 o'clock hour of KPRC 2 Plus Now. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Zach Lajway. All week we've been talking about national public health and its impacts on our lifestyles, including our physical, mental, and environmental well-being. Today's focus is on climate change and the importance of preservation and conservation of the world we live in. This goes hand in hand with the mission of one organization in Houston's 3rd Ward, Friends of Columbia Tap. Joining me live this morning to talk more about the organization, the work that it does, and how you can get involved is its founder, Ed Pettit. Ed, good morning. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you, Zach. It's great to be here.
So for those of our listeners, our viewers who are not familiar with your organization, tell us a little bit about it and how its trail is now named after it.
Great. Well, we have lots of residents who live along the Columbia Tap Trail, a former railway that went through 3rd Ward and East Downtown. And they've been doing environmental projects along the trail for years. But a couple of years ago, we had a grant from Healthy Outdoor Communities, which is funded by the Hogg Foundation to increase access to green space in underserved neighborhoods of color to increase mental health outcomes and improve mental health. And so when we did that, got that funding, we did a big neighborhood event at CUNY Homes, and now it's an annual event, and we formally got our group together in 2022 to be Friends of Columbia Tap.
Oh, that's so awesome. I live in 3rd Ward and I utilize this trail all the time.
Yeah.
The access, the gateway it provides the residents of those neighborhoods to green spaces is really, really instrumental.
Definitely, and we've seen that there's a lack of small neighborhood parks and green spaces in 3rd Ward for residents. We have a beautiful big park called Emancipation Park, but if you live on the further side of town, you might have less access. And so that 4 miles of trail and the section that goes through 3rd Ward, it's a great linear green space that we can utilize better as a park resource for the residents.
Yeah, and it also connects other parts of the city. You have McGregor Bayou that it connects, and then to the south, and then to the north you also have other avenues.
Right. It actually goes all the way to the medical center. There's a bridge that crosses 288. It goes through South McGregor, over Brays Bayou, through 3rd Ward, under the I-45 Gulf Freeway, and it ends up near the Shell Stadium downtown.
Brays Bayou, not McGregor Bayou. Thank you so much. What inspired you to focus on this particular part of the city? Was it the things that you just mentioned and the discrepancy that lie within?
Definitely. So I actually came to Houston in 2011 to do my master's in public health. And I ended up renting a room from a lady in 3rd Ward, just a block away from the trail. And I noticed when I used the trail, it had a lot of folks that were cycling in from downtown or neighborhoods to the north, from the Heights, but I didn't see a lot of residents who lived along the trail using it. And I noticed there wasn't a lot of access. There were a lot of dead-ended streets, a lot of drainage ditches between the residents and the trail. And so I started trying to understand what were some of the urban planning barriers to residents utilizing the trail for their health, for active living. And that actually led me into the field of urban planning and environmental policy, where I'm doing my PhD now at Texas Southern University, which itself is on the trail.
Right, I was just going to say, it's right on the trail. You know, I know a lot of work has been done throughout the years and even recently, within the past few months. Talk to us about your organization's plans for any future endeavors with the trail.
Well, I should say one of the earliest citizen-led projects to increase the green space along the trail was in 1986, just a couple months after the last train traversed the tracks.
Wow.
And Union Pacific pulled up the tracks and kind of left a vacant corridor through the neighborhood. And at first people were using it to dump. There was crime happening, illegal dumping. And so some residents in the South McGregor neighborhood started gardening. And one of the founders of that effort, who led that effort, Michael Lee, at the time in the 80s, he was losing a lot of his friends to the AIDS pandemic. And so that section of the trail that they gardened became the AIDS Memorial Garden. And today it's one of the oldest AIDS memorials in the entire US.
Wow.
And they created a bioswale that collected rainwater and stormwater runoff and let it kind of filter slowly so that when it reached Brays Bayou, it was cleaner. They planted bald cypresses that created a layer of shade and a tree canopy that allowed other species to thrive underneath it. And so we were inspired by that. We've been working with Michael to restore that section of the trail, but also to create other kind of park environments, pocket parks we call them. So we created Dakota's Peace Grove after a late Rotarian named Dakota Stormer on the north end of the trail where we planted a bunch of trees with help from Trees for Houston. We've also created a pocket park at CUNY Homes with support from the Houston Housing Authority and CUNY Homes residents. And so we want to create pocket prairies, pocket parks, and a tree canopy along that entire 4 miles.
Yeah, that's really incredible. The work continues, and it really takes the entire community to get it done.
It does.
That's very impressive. Hey, this was a term that I was not familiar with. Talk to us about urban heat islands.
So urban heat island effect is what happens when you have a dense urban environment with a lot of buildings that trap heat. So, heat rises, but when you have an urban environment and a lot of buildings, it prevents the heat from rising into the cooler upper atmosphere. So, and at night, the buildings actually absorb that heat and release it very slowly, trapping the heat in the community. You also have dark surfaces like asphalt and black rooftops that absorb the heat and trap it. And you also have waste heat from people and the activities and driving and air conditioners letting out their heat. And all of those create this pocket of hot air around cities and residential neighborhoods adjacent to cities. And when you don't have a lot of tree canopy and you don't have a lot of surface that can absorb moisture, when you have a lot of pavement, that also contributes to the heat because water absorbing into the ground and then evaporating or evapotranspirating through plants that use the heat from the air to take water from the soil and evaporate it, that also creates hotter environments. So we're trying to address some of those things with partnerships with Rotary Club. So I'm with the Rotary Club of Houston Skyline, and a couple of years ago we had an international conference we hosted here in Houston, and we actually designed an urban heat island model city that could basically model and show all these impacts that I just mentioned, and that model is on display now at the City of Houston's Green Building Resource Center at the Houston Permitting Building.
And when you look at the landscape of the City of Houston, are these neighborhoods, particularly on the East End in 3rd Ward, considered these hotspots?
So a few years ago, there was an effort with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and local volunteers at the Houston Advanced Research Center to actually drive around with heat sensors on their car to map out the heat of the city. And they chose one day in the middle of August 2020. They all split up and drove around different sections of the city. And they found at the same time of the same day, there's a 17-degree difference between the hottest and coolest part of the city.
Really?
The hottest section was actually Gulfston neighborhood in the southwest because, like I said, it has so many apartment buildings, it has so much concrete, so much pavement, very few trees, but definitely all the neighborhoods that you see closer to the downtown environments, especially neighborhoods of color that were formerly redlined. So neighborhoods in the 1930s that were redlined and made it more difficult for people to access kind of home mortgage loans, and there was a lot of disinvestment from the government, and a lot of highways kind of segregated these cities from other communities. Those neighborhoods today have about a 10-degree hotter temperature than non-redline neighborhoods. So we found that community of color and very dense communities are usually hotter. And so that includes neighborhoods like 3rd Ward on the east side of town.
Yeah. That would be really interesting to revisit that study. I know you're saying that was done in August of 2020 in the middle of the pandemic. I would be interested to see what the findings would be today. I know during the pandemic, a lot of folks were staying home, but it would be interesting to compare that data to a time like today when we're post-pandemic.
Well, you're right on track. There's actually plans right now to replicate that study again.
Fascinating.
Yes.
Well, I want to stay in touch with you to do more on that effort. That seems very interesting. Talk to us, Ed, about people wanting to get involved with the work you're doing. Where can they go to do just that?
Well, we have been doing a lot of work through Friends of Columbia TAP to bring other organizations and communities to the table. We actually meet every Friday at 10 a.m. at the Rado MKT, a new restaurant in the Houston 3rd Ward's El Dorado Ballroom. And we actually lead up to that with a walk. So at 8:45 a.m. we meet at Law Harrington Senior Center, we walk to CUNY Homes, and when we end up at the Rado for our meeting. So it's
a little bit of a trek.
It actually combines, it does, and you'd be surprised, there's residents who thought they could never walk that far, but when they're in a group and where they're supporting each other.
And talking.
Yeah. And it's great because we start the day with active living, healthy living, and then we end up with a community meeting to discuss upcoming projects and issues.
Right?
And so one of the things that I really promote is citizen science, getting citizens involved in collecting data. So that example with the heat study is one of them. Those were just average citizens driving around collecting data. One of the things we're doing at the Columbia TAP is we are working to do a tree canopy study. So we're going around with residents and doing an inventory of each and every tree on the trail. We've actually finished the Columbia TAP. We just finished the Harrisburg Trail in the East End, and now we're working on the MKT Trail in the Heights. And that's being led by some visiting fellows we have through the U.S. Department of State's Community Engagement Exchange Program. But residents can come and they'll teach them how to download the apps to identify the trees and how to map them. You don't need to have any experience in botany or arborist tree. We will teach you how to do that.
That's really, really interesting.
Yeah.
Good work. For those not familiar with the cafe where you all meet, that's right across from Emancipation Park.
Right across from Emancipation Park.
Building that was recently renovated.
Exactly.
Yeah,
It's
gorgeous.
Beautiful 1930s building. It has a beautiful ballroom on the second floor. You should check it out.
Yeah. And if you haven't checked out Columbia TAP, definitely get out there. It's a beautiful green space that connects that part of town. It really is. It's stunning.
We're having our big neighborhood festival on May 11th from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. called Third Ward on Tap. And you can find more information, Google Friends of Columbia TAP or go to friendsofcolumbiatap.com. It's open to the entire community. It'll be held on the trail at CUNY Homes, and we'd love to have everyone out there.
Oh, well, we love to hear that. And of course, we'll make it very simple for you. We'll put all of this information inside this article on our website, clicktohouston.com. Ed, thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you, Zach.
Your friend yesterday stopped by, Jennifer Boley, with Nature and Eclectic Outdoors. She was here talking with us about her effort to revitalize green spaces throughout that Third Ward community. Here's what she had to say.
We were doing activities in local parks regularly and noticed repeatedly that we would be the only people in the park on a beautiful Saturday afternoon in a nice green park. And we saw that as an issue. So after speaking with people about the causes behind why community members weren't using their free local green spaces, we launched the Healthy Outdoor Communities Initiative and brought on tons of community-based partners, larger partners, government agencies, health systems, and with very generous funding from the Hogg Foundation for Mental Health, we started focusing efforts in Third Ward and Acres Homes within Houston to see if we could make a difference in community health, well-being, and resilience by promoting better access to their local parks and green spaces. When we first started having discussions with community members, we got some pushback by community members saying, you know, we work 3 jobs. We don't have time to take our kids to the park. Or there were safety issues. There, you know, was a shooting last week. I don't feel safe taking my kids to the park. There were all kinds of those types of issues. But when we kind of broadened the conversation and said, okay, we understand you guys have bigger fish to fry, tell us about them. And when we just let community members and organizations talk, they kind of came back around to the idea that if they had more equitable access to parks and green spaces, that could actually help mitigate some of the challenges they were having as a community. And so we went from there.
And to hear my full conversation with Jennifer and other conversations that we're having about this topic, head on over to our website, clicktohouston.com, and search Public Health Week.